Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope that this video, as always, finds you well and in good spirits and safe and happy and healthy. Please continue to be strong during these times, my friends. It's very important. And warmest regards, of course. And I'd like to continue with the Q&A. So here is part 2. So I'm looking at the comment section of that particular video where I asked for questions, and once again I want to thank everyone who left behind questions and continues to leave behind questions. This is really, I'm so flattered by this, so thank you. And I hope my answers will be satisfactory, but if not, I apologize, and I sincerely will do my very best here. So let's see, moving forward, I now see we are at MarvelFan 45. So MarvelFan 45 has just inaugurated its own YouTube channel. So please check out MarvelFan 45 and his YouTube channel. So it's really great to see you here, my friend. Here are your questions. So number 1, what are some foreign film epics? You've already helped recommended me some, but I'm just curious how many there are that are just masterpieces. Okay, so I don't, I mean, it's really depending on what, who you ask, I suppose. I think we mentioned Seven Samurai before. I would also recommend, it's a cycle of films, but I would also recommend, for example, the Apu trilogy, Satyajit Ray. The Apu trilogy is one of the most important film trilogies in the history of cinema, and it's even more remarkable that we can now see it in the Criterion Collection release of it anyway, and so I strongly recommend the Apu trilogy. And what else? I would also recommend, for example, either Kieślowski's The Decalogue or the Three Colors trilogy, and I think I would recommend those as well. There are so many others, of course, that I could recommend, and it would just, the list of foreign films. What does that mean? Of course, because it means there are many countries and areas in the world and jurisdictions that fall under that label of foreign, and in particular, I think the idea is maybe films that are not necessarily where one is from, right? And so if we take that to mean, for instance, films that aren't in, let's say, the English language, then I could certainly recommend those films that I just mentioned. And also Ugetsu, I should also say Ugetsu Monogatari, or the film Ugetsu, Mizoguchi is one that I would also recommend, as well as others. But if I could stay here, I could go on and on, but those are just a very small sampling, I suppose. I hope you enjoy them, if you haven't seen them already, of course. Let's see. Number 2, what are the worst criterions in your collection? I think I referred to something similar to that question in the past video. And let's see. Number 3, what are the best foreign films on Criterion? There are many, but I just mentioned also the Decalogue and Three Colors trilogy and Apu trilogy. So those are great places to go. I would also recommend, if you're interested, maybe Jacques Demy, anything by Jacques Demy, or I would say, oh gosh, Fellini. Any Fellini film might be worthwhile. Bergman, of course, is well represented in the Criterion Collection, as is Kurosawa. So you can never go wrong with anything from there. But of course, that's just merely scratching the surface, because there are just so many films in the Criterion Collection, too many to mention in one sitting, of course. But those are just some very, very small examples of a much larger grouping of films that is the Criterion Collection, of course. But you can never go wrong, I think, with something like Bergman or Fellini or Kurosawa. Let's see, number 4. Who are your favorite cinema YouTubers? I think I answered a similar question in the past video. And number 5, how would you try and expand the love of foreign cinema we have in these small communities to the rest of the world? Sorry for the extreme amount of questions, my friend. No need to apologize. Thank you very much for the questions. How would you try and expand the love of foreign cinema? Okay, so we have to set some ground. Well, we have to set a few, make a few assumptions here before answering the question, right? Because what is foreign cinema? What does that mean? So let's take that to mean, for instance, films that aren't, I mean, I speak English on this YouTube channel for the most part, and so not for, actually for the entirety of it, and so let's therefore say that English is the language that is common between you and me, and so based on that, let's therefore consider the word phrase foreign cinema to mean cinema that is not in the English language. But that's still a very broad category, I know, and you know, the more I think about it, perhaps the more I think that my categorization or my way of categorization is probably not the most appropriate. But for sake of my answer, let's just assume that. And so, a non-English language cinema. How would you try and expand the love of non-English language cinema? I suppose it would be that I'm of the opinion or the approach that there is no rule that says that anyone needs to like a certain set of films to qualify for being a film buff or a film fan. Or fan with good taste, or whatever those mean, right? So, in other words, I can say that I know a lot of people who have never seen a non-English language film, and I still think that their taste in cinema is quite exquisite and really great. And I say this because, I mean, of course, I'm not speaking for myself necessarily. Of course, I have my own tastes, and hopefully throughout the course of this YouTube channel, I've tried to make it clear that I do like a certain type of film. It doesn't necessarily have to be in one language or another, but I do like certain types of cinema, that's for sure. And I think you do as well, my friend. And so, but I don't think that I would ever want to, say to someone, if you don't like this particular film, then you have bad taste. And I know that that's not what you're asking, but I have to say that because I think it's the only thing that one can do if one really wants to, let's say, promote non-English language cinema, is really just to talk about it and just to show how much you love it and appreciate it. I think that's the only way. But I don't think of that as a kind of, how should I put it, like a mission or anything. I don't think of it as like I have to convince as many people as possible to see this film, otherwise, you know, it's not going to work out or something like. I don't think of it that way at all. All I can do is say, oh, I really enjoyed this film, or I think this is a really great film, or I strongly recommend watching this if you have the opportunity. And that's all I can say. But anyone who doesn't necessarily follow my advice isn't anyone, I wouldn't consider that person to be someone that has, let's say, bad taste in films. I would also mention this, you know, it really depends on one's perspective. For example, I know some people who love to travel. They love to go to different countries and visit new cities and towns and new cultures that they've never experienced, eat new foods and meet new people in different lands and in different languages. And I know a lot of people like that. And yet I know an almost equal amount of people who don't like to do that, who don't like to travel outside of their comfort zone, but rather just stay in a set routine and not necessarily travel. Maybe it's because of the long distances, or maybe because it's there's a certain trepidation when it comes to the actual methods of travel, like airplanes or something like that, or some other reasons, of course. But I know that some people have a certain way of viewing the world, and other people have other ways of viewing the world. And I don't think there's any good or bad for either approach. Or let me put it this way: I don't think that one approach is necessarily automatically better than the other approach. And I think the similar kind of viewpoint can be applied to cinema. You know, I don't think that if one just wants to watch films that are in one's native language, I think that's perfectly legitimate. Just as it's equally as legitimate to want to watch films from other cultures and other nations. And so whatever approach one has, it's not up to me to say that this approach is good or this approach is bad, but rather the only thing that I can do, just based off my own experience, is to say, I really like this film, and I think it's a really exciting film because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And that's it. And even so, a person has the right to ignore me, or to listen to me, or to go off of my advice, or to completely disregard my advice, or whatever. So that's the only thing that I can do. But I don't think of it as a kind of mission or crusade or anything like that. But it's just a matter of simply expressing the kind of cinema that I like and I enjoy watching. So there's, I mean, we should also say, in terms of non-English language films, there are a lot of also non-English language films that are duds, that are bad movies. And so it's not to say that every non-English language film is a masterpiece or anything like that, just as it's the same with an English language film. You know, not all English language films are masterpieces or something like that. So it really depends on the nature of the film itself. And so but I understand what you're asking, and I understand that maybe when you say the phrase foreign film, I understand that there is a kind of implication to that in the sense that it maybe has a predilection towards what we might also term art house cinema. And I totally get that, and there's a kind of history of how certain types of non-English language films entered into the marketplace, you know, through JSJSFilms or other similar types of international distributors from the 1950s onwards. I totally get that. And so looking at your question through that lens, I would then also say that it's the same answer, which is there's nothing that forces anyone to have to watch a film that he or she doesn't really want to watch, but it's really just a matter of people talking about the films that they like, and then other people talking about the films that they like, and then in this marketplace of ideas, I guess what we can call it, it's just a matter of an exchange of ideas, and seeing which idea that we listen to is one that we find attractive, or one that we find maybe suitable for our own particular needs at that time. And so I guess that's the best way that I can answer it, I suppose. I know I made a lot of assumptions, and I didn't mean to pile on all those assumptions onto the question. But I think it's a really great question. But at the same time, I also think that it's more about one's own self-expression and one's own journey, and seeing how that might influence others, if at all. And if it does, great. But if it doesn't, that's also great, because it's still your journey. I think that's the point that I wanted to make. So I hope that answered the question. I think it's a really great question, my dear friend. So thank you very much for that. Let's see. So moving on, the next question is from Andrew Conger, or Conger. I get pronunciation of names wrong here, so But Andrew, my friend, you say, let's see, is there a certain film or films that you think don't get enough recognition that people should check out? There are a number. I guess one that comes to mind immediately is the film The Cloud-Capped Star, which was recently released by Criterion in late 2019. The Cloud-Capped Star. Anyone who is interested in watching a really powerful, moving piece of cinema, you should watch the film The Cloud-Capped Star. There are a number of others, of course, so many to mention, but that's just an example that came to mind immediately. And then another one here is, let's see, edit. Apologies for adding this late, and apologies if this has been asked before, but this question just came to my head. Would you be interested in showing your home cinema, for lack of a better term? I'm always interested in seeing people's people's setups, such as their TVs, stereo system, any light system, stuff like that. I've been asked this on a number of occasions, so I thank you very much for the question. And so at the moment, I don't have any kind of video like that, and the simple reason is that it's a very crude setup. I don't have this large theater system or anything like that. My home here in Tokyo, Japan, is a little bit small in terms of space, and so we don't have a huge theater system, and we can't put it in any kind of large room or anything like that. I've seen a lot of pictures and other videos online of people who have these large homes, and they have these great, beautiful setups and things. And so my personal setup is in nowhere, it's not even in the same league. And so I don't usually have any kind of video like that. And maybe I might in the future, I don't know. But for the time being, I probably won't make a video like that. But I might change my mind. But I'm still very appreciative of the question, and I totally understand the interest that people might have in how people watch films at home. I think that's a very legitimate question. Yeah, it's again, my setup is very simple. It's nothing too grand, but I do have some machines and pieces of equipment like Laserdisc, VCR, etc., and the Blu-ray DVD player, of course. And so, but it's nothing that extensive. It's nothing that's overly that involves a large amount of investment of money, for instance. It's a pretty basic setup, but maybe one day I can make a video. But yeah, maybe one day I can make a video about that. But thank you very much for expressing an interest. I really appreciate it, my friend. Let's see. Next is our dear friend SJSFilms. So wonderful to see you. Let's see, so you have a number, okay, so you say, thanks for mentioning my channel. I really appreciate it as always. I'm also glad that you are borrowing the idea, as I love the Q&A format, as I mentioned in my video. Here are a couple of questions. What are your favorite Shion Sono films? Okay, so the filmmaker is Sono Shion, or Shion Sono. So Sono is a very unique and quite a Japanese filmmaker of very, some might say, subversive or controversial or provocative films with very intense and almost confrontational subject matter that's presented in a daring and stunning way. And so I've never spoken about the works of Sono on this channel. I would love to one of these days. I'm a great admirer of his work. I understand his work is not necessarily for everyone, and I totally get that, but it is quite unbelievable. And I would love to talk about his works one day. Who knows? Maybe one day that might happen. And you know, films like like the I don't know, Suicide Club, or the Shinjuku Swan films, or Anti-Porno, or Why Don't You Play in Hell, Cold Fish, Himizu, things like that that come to mind. But probably the one that rings a lot of, let's say, emotional resonance for me, let me put it that way, in its in terms of its entirety, and it's a very challenging work, and I mean that in a positive way, is probably the film. The title is Love Exposure, and so I'd love to be able to talk about that film one day, maybe in a, I don't know if a live stream is possible way, because it's a pretty involved film, I think, but maybe one of these days I can talk about that. But that's a great question. And your second question is, have you seen any Finnish films that aren't in the Criterion collection and that aren't by Aki Kaurismäki? You probably have The White Reindeer, Masters of Cinema, at least I would assume. Yes. And also, I don't know that much about Finnish cinema or the cinema of Finland, although I will say that I did take a course in college whereby I did manage to watch a number of films from Finland. And so that was interesting. And the quality of the actual VHS tape was pretty poor. And and it wasn't just for the films of Finland, but for the other film units that we were covering. And we did manage to see films. What did we see, for example? We saw, what is that film called? Commissario Palmu, Inspector Palmu's Error, or The Error of Inspector Palmu. I think it's from the early 1960s, and so that was a pretty interesting film. I enjoyed that one, but again, my knowledge of Finnish cinema is pretty limited. But thank you very much for your questions, and I look forward to your own Q&A video on your great channel, my friend. Let's see. AM asks, what rising directors' films are you most looking forward to, if any? Mine personally would be Robert Eggers. Curious to know what your answer would be. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. I admit that I am not the most up-to-date when it comes to recent film releases. I've mentioned it before that I don't know a lot of recent film releases because I don't manage to see them upon initial release because I'm not able to. But I guess if I had to pick a filmmaker that is a young filmmaker that is certainly up and coming, but has already made a huge imprint on cinema, probably B. Gone, the filmmaker B. Gone. But anyway, I hope that answers your question. But thank you very much for the great question, and cheers from Tokyo. Jammez, hello. Jammez asks, was there ever a time, perhaps when you were younger, when you considered becoming a filmmaker yourself? Yes, I did make mention of this a little bit in the previous Q&A video, but let me say again that yes, I did think about becoming a filmmaker, and I was very serious about it. And in fact, I was so serious that I think in my high school yearbook, because I went to high school in the United States, I actually had in my senior year, because in the senior year you could have a huge picture in the high school yearbook, and you could have a huge picture that was of your own choosing. You could have quotes on the page, etc. I think I actually had quotes from filmmakers. And some people could choose quotes from famous philosophers or works of literature and stuff. I think all the quotes that I chose were from filmmakers, and actually I think I might have that yearbook somewhere. So why don't you just hold on for one moment and I will check to see if I do. Just hold on for 1 second. Okay, so I just came back, and here is my old yearbook from 1997. The school is called King and Low Haywood Thomas High School in Stamford, Connecticut. And the name of the school I think has since changed, but let's see here. I think there was, yes, here it is. So I don't want to show the other persons there, but that was me right there. And there are quotes here all around the page. And so let's see, I have a quote from Federico Fellini. The visionary is the only true realist. I also have a quote from Akira Kurosawa. There is nothing that says more about its creator than the work itself. And Hitchcock, some films are slices of life. minor slices of cake. And I even have one from Scorsese here, Martin Scorsese. Says, "My whole life has been movies and religion, nothing else." And so, yeah, so this is from '97. And so at the time, I was so into cinema and just watching films, because it was all new to me, and it still is, of course, but every film was a new discovery, and so it was a wonderful time to be alive. And so along with watching films, I was also thinking about making movies. And I'd mentioned in an earlier Q&A about making a sort of stop motion animation with some toy cars that I had, and they're driving around, and I used the music from On Her Majesty's Secret Service to create this 2-minute chase through on stairways and rooms and along little windowsills and all that sort of stuff. So it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it very much. But and then that also encouraged me to do more with the little camcorder. And I was thinking, oh gosh, it would be so great to try to expand this further. And so, but it was always a kind of maybe dream or ambition or aspiration that never really materialized into anything. When I went into college, I didn't have any formal training in filmmaking, but it was again something I had been thinking about as a kind of thing to do on the side, but it never really materialized. And I didn't necessarily. I have a type of personality, I suppose, that doesn't necessarily is not able to attract enough people to be able to come together in that way. I don't have that sense of sort of leadership skills that I think one needs in order to be able to assemble the people to help work with you and to make a film like this as a group effort. I don't have that kind of leadership skill in my personality, so I wasn't able to work beyond, let's say, just myself or maybe 1 or 2 other people. And so they would always be very small projects that were maybe 2 or 3 minutes at most, sometimes animation, sometimes not. I also was featured in some films by other students there at the time. I seem to remember that, well, actually, I'll save that for another video. I was going to mention that I was in one very short video of a student at my college, and we were in some of the same classes together, and he asked me to be in one of his films, and so it was a short film, and so I played a role, but it was a kind of a, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if it was if it was that flattering a role, but anyway, I'm still very grateful that he invited me to participate in a short film. It was just a little thing for, I think, for one of his school projects, I suppose. But what was I saying? So anyway, yeah. So this is all to say that it was all something that was in my mind at the time, but unfortunately, I suppose it just never materialized, or I realized that I didn't have the knack or the talent to pursue this further, or to devote a number of years to this kind of profession. And so I decided to not pursue it. I don't think it was overly, I was so serious about it to begin with. I was just interested in it as a kind of pursuit, but not necessarily thinking of it as a kind of profession, if you know what I mean. But still, yes, it was something that was on my mind, and now, I don't think about it very much. But whenever I encounter anyone who has, let's say, screenwriting aspirations or filmmaking aspirations, and they mention that to me, I always am very encouraged by that, and I always try to tell them to keep up with their artistic endeavors, because it's very important, I think, so to follow one's dreams. And so yeah, so those are my, I wouldn't necessarily call it a dream, necessarily for me. It was kind of a dream or kind of an aspiration, but it didn't work out as with a lot of things, I suppose. But I can't complain, because I feel I'm in a very fortunate position now, and so yeah, so that's the situation I was in. And unfortunately, I don't have any of those films. I used to, but I think they were on a VHS tape, and the tape just got lost in the shuffle. And they were, I think, in my parents' house, and my parents were, unfortunately, they passed away, and so I had to clean out all of the furniture, and I found all the VHS tapes that they kept, and one of them was of my films from high school, I think. But unfortunately, I think in the shuffle of packing things, I think I lost the tape, and so that was a shame. But these things happen, and I still have the memories of it in my heart, I suppose. Let's see. So thank you very much for your question. Let's see here. Next is B-Side Records. So hello, my friend. It's nice to see you as always. And let's see. Your questions are: first film that you remember seeing as a child. I really don't know. The first film, I can't say. There's just so many. I can think of a few that are floating around in my memory. Return of the Jedi comes to mind. E.T. comes to mind. Oh gosh. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan comes to mind. And other films like that come to mind. Let's see. Maybe some of the other Star Wars films come to mind. They all blurred together for me because I was very young when, let's say, Return of the Jedi came out, and so yeah, so that was probably around, maybe those films may have been the first films that I remember seeing, but I don't remember the very first film I saw. But then you asked the first movie-going experience and best first movie-going experience, so you're referring to going to the movie theater, I can assume. So again, I can't recall precisely what the first movie theater experience I had, but I do remember, for example, going to the movie theater, my parents taking me and some other friends to go see, for example, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and that there's a particular scene which is quite graphic, and so or a number of scenes actually that are quite graphic, and so I remember that was a pretty scary film for me at the time, but it was still quite, I remember having a lot of fun with it, I think. There was also the film, I don't know, do you know the film Supergirl? There was a film called Supergirl with Faye Dunaway and Helen Slater, and this was a film that and Peter O'Toole, yes, and as Zoltar, right? That's his name, right? Zoltar. And so I actually think that's a really fun film, and it's I think it's an innocent attempt at trying to entertain, and so I thought I've never had any issue with that film. I enjoy it a lot, actually. I don't own it, but I enjoy it very much. And I do remember that film was released around the time that I was a kid, and I do recall, I don't remember the exact movie experience, but I do have a sort of feeling or memory that my parents took me, or we all saw it. You know, I'm an only child, I'm an only child, and so it was the three of us, and so we went to the theater. And I remember that we were the only ones in the theater to watch Supergirl. And so I remember that vividly. I remember thinking, oh gosh, this is a weird feeling to be the only ones in the theater watching this film. It had never happened, I suppose, but that I don't think it was the first movie experience that I had, but it's certainly one of the early ones that I remember. And then you say, what's the best movie-going experience? I think I made a video about this a year or so ago, the most memorable movie theater experiences of my life or something like that, and I mentioned quite a few. I think though that, and I think I must have mentioned this in the video, I don't recall exactly, but I'm pretty sure I did. it was not a movie theater per se, but it was a sort of an auditorium, or one of the auditoriums in my college campus when I was a university student. And one of the films that the film society, the school film society, was able to get in this beautiful print was the Kurosawa film Seven Samurai. And I was in college at the time, but I had seen the film already a number of times, and so I felt like I knew the film quite well, I thought. As well as one might be able to at that age, whatever it was, 18, 19, 20, I suppose. But but I was looking forward to it because I'd never seen it in the theater. And so it was in this auditorium, and it wasn't a big auditorium, but it was fairly large. And so, and I remember that the auditorium, the theater was packed mostly with students. And I was expecting, before the film started, I was kind of expecting maybe the students to not necessarily be into it. It was, of course, an older film from the 1950s, and so maybe for a lot of people this would be the first time to watch the film. And I had those assumptions in my head, which were, which I would find out later to be the wrong assumptions, because when we saw the film, or when the film was running, people were really into it, and they were shouting and screaming and cheering at the right moments. They weren't laughing at the film. There were a few laughs, but I think they were intentional ones, and they were in particular having to do with a kind of love story element of the film. I don't want to get into too much detail about it, but I think they're quite respectful of the film itself. And I do remember that there were gasps and screams and shouts during some of the battle sequences, and it was amazing. And there was moments where there was just gasps and then silence. People were just aghast at what they were seeing. It was a stunning moment that comes in many parts of the film, but there are a number of stunning moments, and the audience was just, they were just gasping, and it was silent, and people were just stunned. And I remember that so much, and it was such a wonderful experience to watch the film Seven Samurai like this, blown up like this, large and in full life, and then to watch it with a crowd that was really into it, and they were just cheering and screaming and shouting and also gasping. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. And it was just, I remember feeling on cloud 9 after I'd left the theater. And I don't know if I necessarily went with anyone at the time. Maybe I saw it by myself, or it was a crowded theater, but I was there not with anyone but by myself, and so I maybe walked back to my dorm room by myself. I was a pretty shy kid. I still am in many respects, but the feeling of walking home after that experience was just magical. So magical. That's probably one of, if not the best film-going experience, movie-going experience that I've had. So wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Let's see. Oh, you have another question, great, which is, if you could meet one filmmaker, living or deceased, who would it be? So let's see. I think that's a really great question, and there's so many to choose from, of course. Oh gosh, so many to choose from. I can't really pick one, but if I had to choose one, oh gosh, I'll say some examples, and just know that anyone that I didn't mention, I just didn't have the time for purposes of this video. But just some examples of people that I would love to meet, that are either living or not, or otherwise. But the great George Romero is someone I would have loved to have met. I have such great fondness and affection for the films that he did, because he brought so much joy to my childhood, and with his art, and so I owe him so much, and I still do. And a lot of people have mentioned these glasses. These glasses are they are real glasses in that they have prescription lenses, because I do wear glasses. I am, what's the phrase? I am nearsighted, and so I need glasses basically for my daily living. And so these have prescription lenses in them, but they are oversized. And I found these glasses and I was inspired by them because they reminded me of the model of glasses that George Romero wore in some of his interviews later in his life. And I know they're not the same model, I think, but they are reminiscent of the ones that George Romero wore. Incidentally, though, I should say that I think this model is the same model that's worn by one character in the remake, the Luca Guadagnino film Suspiria. So there's something for you. But yeah, so this is I wear these glasses. I don't wear them every single day. For instance, I don't wear these to work. I have a number of glasses that I actually like. I like eyewear, and so I have not a lot, but I have a number of other glasses that I wear, depending on my mood or depending on maybe work or exercise or something like that. But I never wear these to work, and I never wear these for exercise, for example. But I wear them at home, or I wear them when I'm watching a movie, or I wear them when I'm doing YouTube, because this is something that reminds me of George Romero, and I affectionately call these glasses my George Romeros. So whenever I do YouTube, I put on the George Romeros, and I feel like I'm all good to go. I'm ready to talk about a film. Without these glasses, for some reason I don't feel ready yet. And so this is just an example of how much I really admire George Romero, and not to mention, of course, his films. I mean, one of the great lines in a George Romero film is, Day of the Dead, Rhodes, right? You've given me nothing but a mouthful of Greek salad. And so anyone who can make a film with a line of dialogue so sublime and beautiful like that is a filmmaker that I would so much love to meet. Oh gosh, George Romero, let's say that. And also, let me just mention too, I'm talking about the works of John Carpenter now, and John Carpenter also, oh gosh, what an amazing, fascinating person that he is. And oh gosh, wouldn't it be great to be able to meet him, John Carpenter, the one, the only John Carpenter. Yeah, and there are many others, of course, that I'd love to meet, but those come to mind right now. But B-Side Records, thank you very much for your lovely, lovely questions. I really appreciate it. Jared, our dear friend Jared Wignall, thank you so much. Jared is one of the people I've known the longest here on YouTube, and he's been around since pretty much the beginning, I think. And so Jared is also such a nice guy. I think he comments on just about every video, and he's always early, and he's also he's got his own YouTube channel. He's talking about cinema, and he's also in the arts, and a young guy, of course, and much younger than I, but he has a real down-to-earth friendliness and a really lovely way about him that I'm so glad to know him, and he's a friend of mine, and he is a friend of all of us. So Jared, thank you so much. Was there one particular film that really got you into films at a younger age, or was it a couple of films that made you want to watch and expand your knowledge of films early on in your life? Oh, that's a good question. I think the film that really sparked my interest in cinema, let's put it that way, is the film, it's probably the film Yojimbo, the Kurosawa film Yojimbo. Now, I must say that I saw Yojimbo when I was a teenager, and up before that time, I had been watching a lot of films, basically renting them from the local VHS rental store. This was when I was a kid. There weren't any Blockbuster videos or anything like that yet. Those came a couple years later. But when I was a kid, they were the more sort of smaller, sort of, what do they call them, mom and pop store types, and also renting from local libraries and such. And so I'd seen, and I was in the United States at the time, And so I had seen a lot of films through rentals. Some of them were children's films, but the others were also films that were like horror films and genre films. And so, you know, I saw all these. I grew up on watching these films, and I also grew up with a sort of I really loved these special effects films, and I learned about artists like Tom Savini, and I also learned about you know, that Fangoria magazine was still around. Of course, it still is, of course, but it was a really big deal. And I remember Fangoria magazine was such a cool magazine, and we didn't have the internet or anything like that, and so this was a really, that was a kind of great time for me to watch these films when I was a kid. Now that I think about it, I probably was a bit too young to watch some of these films, and I wouldn't necessarily show them to my kids now, who are around the same age that I was when I first started to watch, I don't know, like Halloween 2 or something like that. But it was, or Aliens or something, but it was on VHS. But it was such a great time, I thought, and that was that was sort of the film grammar that I grew up with as a kid. But when I entered my teenage years, I think I was kind of looking for something else, not necessarily due to anything cinema-wise, but I had a I don't want to get into too many details, but I was reaching a point in my life where I was feeling like there was some bullying, and also I was feeling a little bit unhappy in terms of growing up in the place that my parents and I were living. And so it was a time also, maybe I was feeling certain maybe set feelings of confusion, also that might have been due to entering into like the years of puberty, etc. So there were a lot of things that were going on that maybe led me to feel somewhat confused or not sure of things, and that was around the time that I began to discover other films. And one of the films that I had encountered was a VHS tape of the Kurosawa film Yojimbo, and I'd seen it, and I had never seen anything quite like it before, and it was quite memorable. It was the version that was a pan and scan VHS tape, because at that time, you know, widescreen presentations on VHS tape were still somewhat rare. And so it wasn't a widescreen, it was the cropped version. And I say pan and scan, but it wasn't even one of those things where it moved back and forth. It was just the cropped screen, and that's it. And it had the opening titles in English, because it was one of those prints that was shown in international markets, and so it had English titles. It wasn't the Japanese titled opening titles, but still, it was in the Japanese language with burnt-in English subtitles in the print itself, but it was in the Japanese language. And so I watched it, and it was I think that film, watching it at that particular age in my life, changed me forever. That film changed me forever. I think if I had not seen that film at the time that I did, I don't think I would be the same person that I am right now. So that changed me, and it meant that was where I think my film journey had already begun before then, but that was the moment where I realized that I was indeed on a film journey. Maybe up to then I had been on a film journey and hadn't known it or didn't realize it, but when I saw Yojimbo, I realized that yes, I have been on a film journey, and I am now on a film journey. And I think because of that feeling that I got, I would now progress onwards and forwards towards my or on my film journey. So it was a very important film to me in many ways. And also, you know, I think a part of it was a sense of pride that I had. I think it was a kind of feeling maybe it was misplaced ultimately, because I was still somewhat confused. I had a sense of confusion also about my identity and my cultural identity. You know, who was I? Was I Japanese? Was I American? Was, you know, that I had a lot of confusion when I was a kid. But watching, and it was very difficult for me to find answers at that time. Since then, of course, I found the answers that I've been looking for, and so I've been able to resolve certain issues that I had felt when I was that age. But during that time, I had discovered Yojimbo and discovered Kurosawa, and I was suddenly filled with a real sense of pride. Again, it might have been misplaced now that I think about it, but still it was a sense of pride that I felt, because this was a Japanese filmmaker that was making this Japanese film about a Japanese character in a Japanese setting, and it was brilliant. And I felt exhilarated and just knocked off my feet. And so that really filled me up with a sense of pride, and thus it gave me a further sense of happiness. I don't know if that makes any sense. But in any event, that really propelled me forward, and it made me realize that yes, up to now I have been on a film journey, and yes, from here on out I will continue on my film journey. So I think it was the film Yojimbo that really that was the spark for me. And then there were many others that came that came later. We've spoken about the film 12 Angry Men on this YouTube channel. I'd actually seen the film for the first time around that time, around maybe middle school or high school, I think. Somewhere around that time, and I just watched it over and over again. I was discovering Bergman films, Ingmar Bergman films, at least the ones I could get my hands on, and what were some of them I could see. The Seventh Seal I was able to watch. The Virgin Spring I was able to watch. Also Fellini films I was able to watch. So La Strada, 8½. La Dolce Vita also I was able to watch in this terrible cropped version of it, but it was still better than nothing. And I also watched, going back to Kurosawa, I remember there was the VHS of Seven Samurai, and I remember it was so deceptive. I still remember this to this day. It was the VHS of Seven Samurai, but it had a picture of Toshiro Mifune in Yojimbo. So as you know, the character of Toshiro Mifune in Yojimbo is very different from the character of Toshiro Mifune in the film Seven Samurai. And so I felt somewhat betrayed when I saw Seven Samurai, because as I saw it and as I watched it for the first time on those VHS tapes, I realized that there was nowhere in that film a scene that was reminiscent of Toshiro Mifune's character in Yojimbo, and still I enjoyed the film to bits. And so I wasn't annoyed with the film per se, but I was a little bit annoyed at the marketing or the VHS box art or the box pictures. But that's a very minor point, I suppose. But the point is that this watching of Yojimbo then really sparked my interest in all the films that I could get my hands on at the time. Again, it was limited access. I couldn't go to a movie theater and watch, I couldn't go and watch Wild Strawberries or something like that, but I was able to watch Wild Strawberries on VHS when I was in high school, and so it was a wonderful time. And Antonioni came later, and so and other films, and then Fassbinder. My Fassbinder phase, I think we all have these phases, I suppose, and when I was younger I had a Fassbinder phase where I was watching nothing but Fassbinder works, and I didn't get into that until college, because my college had a really great film library, and I was able to essentially rent these films for free in essence, and I was able to watch all these Fassbinder films which were on these VHS tapes that at the time were really, really expensive. You couldn't just go and order a VHS tape of Fassbinder. You had to go to a store or something like that. But they were all housed in one location at the university library, or the film library, the archive, and so it was that was my Fassbinder phase, and also Godard phase. The library we had a great Godard collection. The versions, of course, weren't as crisp and clean in image quality like we have now, but it was still, as you know, Godard films were, some of them were really, really hard to get one's hands on, and so to be able to watch Godard films like this, it was great. So there was another phase in my life that was Godard, and many other phases. But the point is that it was all sparked by that one moment of watching Yojimbo. So yeah, so that's the situation with that. So okay, so I see that I have answered a number of questions now, but maybe we are going a little bit long, so why don't we stop now here. And I want to say thank you very much to those of you who have submitted questions. I apologize if I didn't get to your question now, but I hope you can forgive me, and I will continue on with this Q&A as long as I can, because I know that there are other questions that have been left behind, and I don't want to ignore those. And once again, if I don't want to offend anyone with my own personal comments, so if I've said anything that might be a bit too abrasive or not necessarily to your liking, I apologize. You can always let me know, and I will try to address the issue the best of my ability. But otherwise, my friends, please, thank you very much again for expressing your interest in this channel and in me. And so I find that very flattering, and I really appreciate the kindness and support and friendship. So let's call it a day for now. But until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. So thank you very much, my friends, and cheers.